I presented myself as maybe someone that could contribute value, and I just found a way to stick. And if you don't let anyone tell you no, and you build a portfolio of experience and lessons, you'll find a place. But don't wait for it to be handed out to you, especially right now when no one knows what's going on in all industries.
Fair.
Yeah.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mac Show. Coming up on today's show, we speak about a rise in online hate that is turning into real-world violence. Plus, we share what you need to know about Apple's latest news and upgrades, including a very cool feature that will make traveling even more accessible. And Jeff, speaking of Apple, we did a great interview a few weeks ago about Apple in China. And this week, you're going to talk about the power and influence of China.
I sure am, Amber. And, you know, a lot of people don't realize exactly how much power China has amassed over the past couple of decades. And some of it is really cause for concern. So we'll cover that. Plus, we have a warning for startup founders pitching in Chinese tech competitions. And I don't want to give it all away, so let's get to the headlines.
Newsfeed.
We recorded this episode a few days after 31-year-old U.S. conservative activist Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. Like many, I saw the video online, and it's really devastating to think that we've gotten to this point where there are disagreements online that are leading to political violence. As someone who spends a lot of time on social media, I have seen this firsthand. I think it's fair to say that the temperature is rising. I've also been on the receiving end of online hate, sometimes from people I know who can't seem to engage in respectful discourse without hurling insults or lobbing threats. It is really a scary time, Jeff. And in this case, it led to actual murder.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm no big fan of Charlie Kirk, other than I did like his openness to debate. Although what that showed most of the time is how completely intellectually unprepared a lot of people are to defend very strongly held beliefs. So I think there's a lesson in that. But, you know, the number of people who kind of actively were celebrating his death online, that's a really bad sign. People, you know, you don't want to encourage political assassinations. That's not the world we want to live in. And it's just another part of the escalating level of political violence that the States has seen, and probably hasn't seen these levels since the 1960s. So the difference being now we've got a bunch of half-wits, sadists, and grifters on social media pouring gasoline on the fire. So, yeah, it's not a good thing. It's really a cause for concern.
And I think one of the things that we really want to do on this show is to have conversations that are rooted in data. So I just want to pick up on that point. You talked about escalating political violence, and that is absolutely true. And we have numbers to show that. I was watching CNN, and they put up a chart that talked about violence against key political figures starting in 2011. And that was, of course, the shooting of Gabby Giffords. There were a couple of cases over the course of the next 10 years. But then it really started to escalate in 2022. And out of the 10 examples of political violence that they showed, 7 or 8 of them were in just the last few years. And most of them were in 2025.
Wow.
So it is scary, and we have the numbers to show that as well. We're going to switch gears now and talk about another story that has been trending. And this one is in a totally different direction, all about Apple's annual fall iPhone event. It didn't seem like there was that one more thing moment that we all know in Apple events. But Jeff, it looks like another solid line of products. What stood out for you?
So I think the big thing that they're positioning as the major announcement there is what Tim Cook called the newest member of the iPhone family, the iPhone Air. So this seems sort of nestled between the iPhone 17 and the 17 Pro in terms of features and cost. It's a completely new design. It actually looks quite beautiful. It's only 5.6 millimeters thick, so that's the thinnest iPhone ever. Got a 6.5-inch display that includes what they're calling the plateau, which is sort of a big bump out to hold the extra thickness of the cameras and some other gear. And that design's been carried over to the new iPhone 17 Pro and Pro Max. So that's pretty neat. Something that's very cool, though, that you might not pick up on is the entire iPhone lineup, the new iPhones now have square camera sensors. And what this means is that you no longer have to turn your phone on its side to get your maximum resolution landscape video or photo. So because the sensor is square, it's the same no matter where you have it. So that's really cool. It'll look bigger on the screen if you turn it to the side, but in terms of quality, it'll be just the same either way. And they also have added center stage to all the cameras. That's the one that follows you around when you move, and better image stabilization and other cool features. And in fact, just one of the ways they demonstrated using this, and I think it was on the air, is they have somebody at a basketball game recording the basketball game with their rear camera, and then the front-facing camera has them in a little box over the video. So it's simultaneously recording two types of video, and the center stage allows it to keep your head in sort of a little box on the main screen when you're recording something on the other side. So they've really wrapped the technology up to some pretty cool features. I think there's going to be a lot of, online content creators who are going to be pretty happy about these.
Yeah, that sounds super cool. And I have to say, I was talking about the new iPhone on a local radio station in Toronto, and I was trying to describe just how thin it is. And I did a bunch of comparisons online, and the iPhone Air is almost comparable to two nickels stacked on top of each other. If you're wondering
Wow.
just how thin it took me a while to find that, but
That's a really good one. Yeah.
it's a good one just to try to visualize it. Also, let's talk a little bit about storage, because when it comes to the new iPhones, you are starting with more storage. Anything else that you thought was cool?
Yeah, I think the 256 gigs of baseline storage, that move should have been made long ago. They also announced new Apple Watches. Nothing super exciting there, but everything looks good. But the AirPods Pro 3 headphones were actually a big standout for me. And the big reason why is, on top of getting IP57 water resistance, which is super handy and the first time in AirPods Pro, is that they have this new live translation feature. So this works with your iPhone to simultaneously translate what somebody's saying to you in another language. If that person also has AirPods Pro 3, then it works both ways. So you basically can simultaneously talk. It will duck the other person's voice and translate their foreign language to your language in your ear, and do that back and forth. If only one of you has it, so if I just have the AirPods Pro 3 and the other person doesn't, it'll do that for me, so I hear them speaking in English. When I speak back to them in English, it will show on my phone what I'm saying in text, and they can play that back as well. So cool. It reminds me of like the Babelfish from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or the Universal Translator in Star Trek, and I think that's a really empowering, kind of wonderful feature to add. And I know other companies are working at this too, but the way Apple demoed it there looks very compelling. So I can't wait to try that out.
Yeah, I mean, and we mentioned that off the top of the show. I think it makes traveling more accessible, right? You know, you can actually travel and be able to speak, I put that in quotes, the local language. So really, really cool. In other news, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission says it's launching an inquiry into AI chatbots acting as companions to companies including OpenAI, Meta, xAI, Alphabet, and Snap, asking them how they, and we're quoting here, measure, test, and monitor potentially negative impacts of this technology on children and teens. Jeff, we have talked a lot about this in the past, and your segment on ChatGPT's role in the 16-year-old suicide of a young boy that attracted a lot of attention. Do you think that this has an opportunity to actually improve things in terms of safety?
I mean, I think shedding light on stuff like this is always good. So that's great. I also think there's got to be some political legs for the stance of we want to protect kids online. So I'm hoping that's something that can cross the aisle in terms of getting support from both sides. So positive in terms of first steps. I hope there's some very serious follow through, though, and that it doesn't take forever to get the information they need from some of these companies. We talked about how Tesla was found like hiding information in the previous court case around the Tesla autopilot death. And speaking of OpenAI and legal implications, the Canadian news publishers who filed a copyright violation suit against OpenAI in Ontario last fall, they're now fighting OpenAI's argument that the case should actually be heard in the United States instead of in Canada.
Oh, wow. Well, let's hope that that does not happen. It's a pretty complex case and the first of its kind in Canada. So we'll have to wait and see. Just one note on that, Jeff. I think about the copyright issues when it comes to publishers and how these models are trained. And I think about the fact even individual creators, if you're uploading anything online, all of a sudden you can get banned from that platform if they detect even like 5 seconds of music that you don't own.
Yeah.
But these models are being trained on, the copyrighted material from thousands, if not millions of people. So what a weird world we live in. You talked about the uber wealthy in your segment, The Other Mac, last week, but it looks like we have a new richest person. This is Oracle's Larry Ellison, whose wealth has been growing quickly as the result of cloud computing deals and AI companies such as OpenAI.
Yeah, so OpenAI signed a $300 billion deal for computing power with Oracle. This is one of the several things that tipped Larry Ellison over into the richest person. That may go back and forth, who knows, stock market values. So he co-founded Oracle. He owns a 41% stake of it, so that's pretty impressive. And it looks like the unprecedented hunger for cloud infrastructure is helping NVIDIA, Broadcom, and other stocks go up in value as companies in the supply chain, as well as Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft, and others invest billions into AI infrastructure. So there is a bit of a high tide raising all boats for this, but yeah, it looks like Larry and Oracle have come out on top.
Well, we've talked about this before, but there's an incredible amount of money being spent right now. And one place where we don't see money spent, unfortunately, is in our schools, which are also the subject of cyber attacks and the like. A recent analysis from the UK's Information Commissioner's Office has shown that of the 215 data breaches of educational institutions that they analyzed, this is crazy. 57% of them were conducted by students.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, not funny, but before anyone thinks we've got a new generation of super hackers in the UK, we should note that almost a third of these hacks were accomplished just by guessing easy passwords or literally finding the login details written down somewhere. But that said, they did estimate that about 5% of the student attacks used advanced hacking methods. So there are probably some Mr. Robot types out there as well.
Wow, that kind of blew me away. Now, speaking of hacking, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, in a message release with U.S. partners, is warning Canadian tech startups about the risks involved in participating in international pitch competitions organized by the Chinese government, noting that, quoting here, startups participating in these competitions can lose their intellectual property, have their data misused, and see their talent recruited by competitors.
Yeah, it's interesting that they came out with this. They also cited the case of pitch competitions held in Canada, Britain, the US, and Australia last year, where winners were pressed to create businesses in the Chinese city that sponsored the event and also provide detailed banking, personal, and passport data to receive any awards or investment, as well as saying that the additional warning being that participants should assume that if they're traveling abroad for these kinds of things to pitch, they should absolutely assume they're being spied on as well. So, it's an interesting warning to have to pay attention to. I'm not quite sure how startup founders deal with this, but it shows, and as we'll talk about, the dangers with China.
Yeah, I mean, what a warning, and really a great segue to your segment in The Other Mac, where you're going to talk about the amount of power that China wields in the world. That's coming up next.
The Other Mac.
As you may have heard, China held its 2025 China Victory Day Parade in early September, with Chinese President Xi Jinping flanked by Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. The first time the leaders of these countries have been seen together like this since 1959. With the U.S. under Donald Trump seemingly in many ways abandoning its traditional global roles and allies, I thought it'd be a good time to take a quick look at where China is now through a few different lenses. Since we opened with the Victory Day Parade, let's start militarily. So China used the parade to show off a variety of advanced equipment, including revealing publicly for the first time its new land, air, and sea nuclear-capable missiles, a triad of destruction that's only shared by the U.S., Russia, India, and probably Israel. These were shown alongside a host of other technologies, some of which seemed specifically aimed at giving the U.S. cause for restraint in the South China Sea and beyond. As you may know, China claims sovereignty over almost the entirety of the South China Sea, even though there are at least a handful of other countries who are supposed to control those waters according to international law. Now, this hasn't stopped China from building artificial islands and investing over $50 billion in military infrastructure in the sea. And not only does this allow them to control an area through which almost 1/3 of global maritime trade flows at an estimated value of $3.4 trillion a year, there are also enormous oil and gas reserves under those same waters. But how can they control these waters? Well, after years in planning and investment, it's estimated that China's shipbuilding capacity is now as much as 200 times that of the United States. In fact, 60% of global shipbuilding orders this year have been at Chinese shipyards, and the Chinese Navy now has more warships than the U.S. Navy. But to be clear, the U.S. still has more large ships, submarines, and aircraft carriers, but that's likely exactly why China featured weapons like its new hypersonic anti-ship missiles at the parade too, which were specifically designed for use against U.S. aircraft carriers. Among other technologies demonstrated were unmanned helicopters and drones. In fact, China controls almost 90% of the global market for commercial drones, and the parade included a variety of AI-powered military drones, as well as a 65-foot-long submarine drone, a stealth attack drone to accompany manned fighter jet missions, and even four-legged robot wolves designed for hunting down enemy soldiers, sweeping minefields, reconnaissance, and more. Now, speaking of robots and AI, another area where China has executed a plan over decades with a level of focus and clarity that seems to be beyond most Western countries is relative to the rare earth metals used to manufacture electronics. While many of these minerals are thankfully more plentiful than their name might suggest, China has a near monopoly on refining them and has demonstrated its ability to tighten the global supply chain in absolutely devastating ways. Turning to other tech, we recently discussed on the show how China also dominates the global electric vehicle industry, with more than 70% of last year's global EV production. It also controls between 70 to 90% of every stage of the value chain globally for lithium-ion batteries. Beyond that, for manufacturing in general, China's output is almost 1/3 of the global output and bigger than the US, Japan, Germany, and India combined. And that's a tripling of Chinese manufacturing output in just 20 years. So what's my point? I guess it's just that we need to look around at our day-to-day lives and better understand exactly how much of what we use is so reliant on China. That was okay when the global trading order was a priority for the US and the rest of the world, but Trump has shown us we can't rely on that world really ever coming back. So it's time for the rest of us to get our countries in order because we're living under two superpowers who no longer feel much reluctance about bullying or punishing anyone they feel crosses them. And the consequences, given what I've just said, could be terrifying. I'm TheOtherMac.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Douglas Soltys is the editor-in-chief at Betakit. Betakit launched in 2012 and tells important stories of Canadian startups and tech innovation. Douglas dropped by our studio in Toronto to speak with Amber about building a media business and supporting a tech community along the way. Here's their conversation.
Talking Tech.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Amber.
Douglas, I think you're going to hate this question before we get started because I brought you here to talk about what's happening in Canadian tech.
Yes.
But I want to know a little bit about you and your story. How did you get to this point?
Oh, it's a long and interesting story, Amber. I would say it's been mostly accidental. I have always had an interest in tech from a very young age, but I got into tech and journalism completely by looking for like a summer job while in university, finding myself working for a BlackBerry software company in Ottawa, like before social media existed, making a bunch of mistakes, and then starting to write about tech, starting to read tech coverage, getting really interested in the stories behind the companies that build all the fun things that I really like playing with. And that led me to work for a bunch of different tech companies in Canada. So I just ended up swinging back and forth between working for tech companies or writing about Canadian tech. But it was mostly because I was like tired of bartending in the summer to pay my way through university.
What advice do you have for young people right now? Because we know that youth unemployment is on the rise. Young people are having a hard time finding those opportunities.
Yeah.
What would you say in terms of your own experience?
I am now old enough to know that all of the directional guidance I could give to a young person like doesn't exist anymore because it's been so long. But I will say, you know, if you are in an environment where the job market is difficult, look for ways in which you can either make a mark, showcase your skills, or learn something. Ask everyone. I was in a position where, again, I was just bartending. I knew people who were running companies. I presented myself as maybe someone that could contribute value, and I just found a way to stick. And if you don't let anyone tell you no, and you build a portfolio of experience and lessons, you'll find a place. But don't wait for it to be handed out to you, especially right now when no one knows what's going on in all industries.
Fair.
Yeah.
For people who aren't familiar with Betakit, what is the story behind that publication?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Betakit is the publication of record for Canadian tech and startups, innovation broadly. And I think it kind of speaks to that motivation I had of having an interest in tech, but believing fundamentally that Canadian tech businesses, how tech impacts Canada is important and like worthy of coverage and attention. And essentially Betakit's mission is to be the place for that storytelling to happen. That mission has changed over the years. Betakit actually predates me. It was actually initially launched under Post Media as a Canadian-based, globally focused publication. It did some amazing work, but was shut down, and we ended up relaunching it as something that was Canadian-based, Canadian-focused. So I guess if there was one thing in my career that I knew I cared about, it was what was happening in Canada. And then I kind of found my way into tech and journalism, and all of those three things kind of converged.
The Canadian tech scene has really evolved over the past couple of decades. You and I have both been part of that. It used to be a smaller group of people, and it's grown quite a bit. Obviously, tech has become kind of the main player out there across all industries. When you think back to some of those early days of the tech community in Canada, what are some of the things that maybe you miss?
Oh, that's a great question. I miss running tech events with you in like the late aughts, where we'd be like, you know what? We need to have a 2-day conference about the future of mobile. Things have really changed. I think probably what I miss the most, and it's starting to come back, was a sense of community, especially pre-COVID, and with Canada being smaller and having kind of innovation isolated in different cities across the country. You had these like really tight, small networks of people getting together, supporting each other. There was almost like tech scenes in every city across Canada. And you'd have all of these like community-driven events, activities, just like networks of people coming together. COVID really kind of like put a pin in that, but we're starting to see it come back. I think maybe one of the biggest things that has changed because of that is that the conversation around Canada's place in global tech has really, really changed. There used to be just one or two Canadian companies that might be globally recognized, and most people wouldn't recognize them as Canadian companies. And I think now people are much more vocal about being a Canadian company on the world stage. They're much more vocal about being a Canadian working at a global tech company. So that's been really, really cool to see. But I think we need to bring back a little bit more of the community element, like the get-togethers.
Yeah, I definitely miss those days.
We used to do tweet-ups.
Yeah,
remember?
we would do tweet-ups. I mean, there were lots of gatherings. I would argue in some cases, the reason was that we kind of needed each other, right? Because it was very isolating, but also if you worked in tech, you were kind of on the sidelines of what was actually happening in the real world. I mean, that's certainly changed over the years. So in some ways, it's been just a product of technology growing up. But I think it's a really interesting time in technology technology in Canada today. I mean,
Yeah.
so much is happening. You're doing a great job with your team of keeping track of some of the big themes when it comes to what's taking place in tech today. But now there's this layering on of not only is Canadian tech important, it is critical when we think about our economic sovereignty
Yes.
and the future of this country.
New elements have entered the conversation a little bit before. And I think maybe some of that Canadian identity component that I was speaking to before was maybe a nice to have, that we need to be a little bit more boisterous and fly the flag. And now it's actually an existential question when it comes to the sovereignty of our innovation, where the talent goes, where the IP goes. These are long-standing considerations, but they get really, really amplified when like the geopolitical consideration changes. I don't know if you want to get into that, but I think every Canadian is probably aware of it, and it's certainly impacting the Canadian tech space.
Yeah, I think let's definitely get into it. I think just to my point and your point as well, I think what we're seeing right now, it's not a sort of, hey, it's nice to have if Canadian technology succeeds.
Yeah.
We have to have Canadian technology companies here in Canada. We have to buy technology from Canadian companies. And so there is this pressure on that might change the game again. What do you think about this moment in time?
Maybe the best positive framing I could put it is it's a moment of opportunity. It's a real moment and a window for change to happen. And I think the more that Canadians across society kind of lean into the opportunity to do that, the better the outcomes will be. I think, again, going back to COVID for a variety of reasons, there'd been a bit of malaise in Canada. The sense, one of our biggest stories in 2024 was kind of this frustration with the sense that nothing could change, that we couldn't get out of the box that we were in. And I think this year has kind of blown that box wide open. So it's a moment where we can actually look to structurally make changes to enable the things that we want to have. Possibly by necessity, but hey, necessity, mother of invention. I like seeing this in a positive light.
Yeah, I think it is such a great opportunity that we're in right now. And we've certainly gone through a lot of changes, right? I think 2025 feels to me at least like a year of change when it comes to tech. We have new leadership in power when it comes to our Canadian government. And you feel it all around us, this massive change. And then in the midst of this, we also have the AI revolution and this AI race that is taking place. One of the things I always wonder about, and I'd be curious from your many years of reporting in tech, not to make you feel old, but...
No, you did. I do.
Sorry about that. But I think of it, who is Canada in the context of what's happening in tech? Because let's be honest, we're not going to be able to compete with China when it comes to some of these companies.
Yeah, I think that part of the conversation has really, really been pointed, not only in the AI component, but also when it's something that's new and emergent, like there's a Canadian defense tech sector suddenly spinning up. And I think Canadians getting a really good sense of our strengths, weaknesses, where our resources lie, and supporting the development and growth of that. If you look at an AI, we do not have the largest AI companies in the world. We do not have the amount of capital that you're seeing internationally being flowed through into OpenAI or Anthropic or anyone else. What we all agree that we have is incredible innovators, and at the fundamental research level, a lot of the core R&D that's fueling the AI sector. And I think if we can carve out a space where we can capture the value from that work, Canada might not be the biggest boat in the sea, but we can kind of be steering the direction of where they head.
And I think we also have to have some honest conversations too, right? Like there is this narrative that I keep hearing out there, I think in some tech circles, that, oh my gosh, Canadian tech founders and companies are jumping ship. They're leaving Canada. There's no opportunities here. Young Canadians are leaving en masse. Yeah. This frustrated me so much to the point where I spent about an hour and a half doing extensive research, and none of that data is true. The numbers are actually on the decline. Yeah. In fact, we haven't seen numbers in almost 20 years since the dot-com boom in terms of people actually leaving Canada and moving permanently to the US. So it's been slowly going down. So to me, it feels like, is Canada a good place to build a tech company? And my argument would be yes, but you do have some people in the tech community kind of sort of a little bit more negative around that story of why this isn't the right place.
Yeah, it's taking a step back. I'll say we were so indexed on the opportunity for Canadian innovation that we actually released a print issue this year called Most Ambitious, highlighting ambitious Canadians, Canadian companies, Canadians around the world. I think it starts with identifying some of the, honest limitations we have as a smaller country on the global stage. But then when it self-reinforces into things can't change, everyone's leaving here, the government isn't supporting us, we need more help, we can't, tall poppy syndrome, yada, yada, yada. I don't think that is either true or helpful in any way. When it comes to the data of what's actually happening, again, you can see this in terms of opportunity. There's opportunity for us to right-size our programs of support. There's opportunity for Canadians to buy from Canadian companies, for Canadian companies to supply what we need rather than looking for international global giants to do it for us. There's an opportunity for Canada to make it easier for a new generation of entrepreneurs and innovators to stay here rather than feeling like it's Silicon Valley or bust. Those are all different things, though. And I think when we look at our work at Betakit, there's that overarching desire to tell the story of Canadian tech and innovation, but an understanding that that story is built by all these little smaller stories that kind of connect with each other. So I'm not a big guy to paint things in broad brushstrokes, but yeah, we dropped a print issue saying and showcasing how Canadians are ambitious and innovative. And I think that anyone's trying to say otherwise or that things can't be built here to that level should read that issue.
Well, I have to say, I have a copy of that on our coffee table. Awesome. Because it is a really beautiful publication. I think it's a reminder every time I walk by it in my house to look at that and realize all these incredible tech stories. I've been telling these stories for the past couple of decades as well, speaking to founders and speaking to teams of people who are building amazing companies right here in Canada. Certainly it's not perfect. We don't have, the investment money that we probably need or want. But listen, there's a lot of other things in Canada that make this a special place to build a company. It's a very inclusive, diverse country and lots of reasons to want to live here. Also a very free country as well. Yeah. When you think about some of the startups that you're profiling in Betakit and you're speaking to, because this is one of the things that I love about your publication, I'm hearing about companies I didn't even know about. Yeah. Like Betakit's the only place that I can go and hear about these amazing companies because it feels like there's nowhere else for them to have a place in our modern media world.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. That's you're proving our value proposition. That's literally the intention. And with my tech career, I've either written about tech or worked for tech companies, always within Canada, because that was the most important thing for me. Living in Canada, doing that work from Canada was really important. When it comes to the journalism, creating a space where we can tell those stories, and in that, fundamentally saying that these stories are worthy of being told is the whole deal for us. Now, in that work, to what you were just pointing to, the most fun is about finding about companies or people that you've never heard of. You're suddenly like, I need to tell everyone about this. The component I enjoyed the most about our Most Ambitious issue was uncovering, learning about these companies that are doing this work, particularly in the space sector. I wasn't really aware of Canada's space sector. I think everyone's heard of Canadarm and maybe it ends there. We have this huge spread of companies across Canada that are doing really interesting thing from low Earth orbit satellites to trying to put nuclear reactors on the moon, to other companies saying you don't need to put a nuclear reactor on the moon. We can just beam the sun's energy to the moon. We'll just handle it that way. You have this wonderful company called Nordspace that is trying to kickstart commercial space launches from within Canada. It's our mission to make sure that people know about those stories, and it's incredibly fun to dive into them, learn about them, and then just the energy to share that with an audience is just a self-reinforcing cycle.
Now, I will say that I would have expected by this point in 2025, if I'm thinking back to when I started as a tech reporter at City TV, maybe it was 2003, there were not that many of us, but I would have expected that the tech journalism space would have grown a lot, and we would have had very large publications kind of covering what was happening in the sector, because it is so important, and covering what's happening all across the country. I feel like there's a lot of weight on the shoulders of Betakit to do that job, and you're still a pretty small team.
Yeah, it's a big mission. I'm not saying that we chose, like in choosing Canada and making sure that we were covering like a sector in terms of like tech innovation, but then geofencing that around Canada. That's still a pretty big mission, but it is, again, one where we chose that mission because no one else was taking on the mantle. When I started at Betakit, there wasn't even like regular tech coverage at like the national daily publications. Canadian tech companies didn't have a place to go for their story. They didn't expect coverage. So if we're creating a space for companies to know that that story is going to be told, we're succeeding. But I do also think it's a reflection of how small Canadian media is relative to Canadian tech. I think Canadian tech has grown a lot more in the intervening years than the Canadian media space.
Let's talk about where the country is going forward. There is a huge focus on AI. That's something that we've talked a lot about on this podcast. Yeah. We've had policy experts on saying that Canada has maybe 18 months to really build infrastructure and build companies in the AI space in a significant way. I know it's not your job to be optimistic. You're supposed to tell the stories that take place, but how optimistic are you that we're on the right path?
That's a great question. I don't actually know what the right path is, because particularly with AI, this is a space where there are still a lot of really important questions about the technology and who it's impacting. You might be coming on the Betakit podcast sometime soon to talk about that with me, so I can learn from your expertise. I think what everybody wants is a sense that if Canada as a country or within industry is choosing to make a mark, we have the capacity to do so. And there's actual movement rather than the endless series of talking points and commitments that kind of lead nowhere. Now, the timeline for that to like happen in the AI space, Canada has a lot of things on its docket. The sovereignty consideration, economic sovereignty, like data sovereignty, kind of take precedent over that. But from my experience, when I think of AI, and we've been covering it so much, I always try to draw comparisons from previous eras of tech. And the most interesting thing for me about the AI space, other than like what the technology is trying to do, is the fact that everyone has seemed to embrace this technology before it's baked. You didn't see that in the mobile era. You didn't really see that with cloud technology. You didn't really see that with any other sort of like mass societal adoption. It's like the iPhone happened when people were ready to have like a smartphone that they use every day. People are using AI in ways that like do not work and actually cause harm, and no one's really making any money from it, but everyone's spending money on it. So I think any prediction as to a window to like get this right is being driven by a sense of urgency to not miss out on the opportunity. But I don't think that there is a window right now. Maybe that's just the journalist in me failing to like predict trends instead of reporting on them. But this is inning 2 of a very long ball game. So I don't think we're missing any opportunity.
I just want to pick up on what you said, because I actually feel like this is the problem that we have in Canada right now. You said, I don't even know what path we're on. This is something I think about all the time. I think generally speaking, as a country, we don't do a great job of sort of communicating where we're heading and the goals that we have. Like you said, we're having an announcement here, an announcement there. One day we're leaders when it comes to AI safety. The next day we're leaders when it comes to all of our amazing academics in the AI space and research in the AI space. The next day we're focusing on commercialization. We have to do all of those things, but I don't think we've figured out sort of what that's going to look like for Canada. So the path feels very unclear in many ways.
Well, like we are living in an era of like gross uncertainty across all levels. I think relative to other countries where it's very clear the path that they are on, not knowing where we're going could be comparatively better. But I do, to what you're saying, Canada is very, very good at starting things. We're very good at kicking things off. That fundamental research coming out of our major universities, drafting initial concepts for legislation like AI safety or just a digital charter of rights. We're not closers, or we don't have a great record of being closers and delivering. I think there's a lot of room to grow there, but I also don't know. It might be uniquely Canadian that we're all looking around and being like, guys, how do we do this together? Because I don't think a lot of other countries look at things that way. I don't think entrepreneurs or innovators in the States necessarily look at themselves as representatives or team players of like the American innovation space in the way that we do in Canada. That might be a good thing for us, but it's we got to kind of get over the existential navel gazing a bit, or at least turn that into productive energy.
I think we have a little bit of a people-pleasing mentality in Canada, right? Like we've always been a likable,
I hope this interview is
country.
going well for you. I'm trying so hard to make it useful for your audience.
But that is kind of what our country is like, right? And I think that unfortunately doesn't lend itself to really being leaders in certain scenarios, even though we may be in specific sectors. You don't really see that kind of bravado, or you don't really see that ambition, to use a word from the Betakit publication and event this summer. You don't really see it out there because it's not really a Canadian value in some ways. And yet I think we're at a time where I think Canada does stand to play a really important role on this AI journey. And that role could be a combination of both AI innovation and AI safety. Mm-hmm. I mean, those two things can be compatible, despite what people think. I think that they can go hand in hand, but we're still kind of figuring this stuff out.
Yeah. But in that decision, there is this belief that Canadian entrepreneurs and innovators are either trying to do something for Canada or bring everyone along together with them. Like Nord Space is trying to launch rockets in Newfoundland, not because it's the most profitable thing for them to do, but they want Canada to have a commercial space launch capacity. If Canada was a country filled with people that were looking to do what was just best for themselves at all times, we wouldn't be having this existential conversation of like, where's Canada on this? What are we going to do together? I think that's an awesome motivator that if we can direct, we can actually, deliver on some of these opportunities.
When you look back at your career, I won't mention how many years it's been again. I don't want to embarrass you. It's been years. But when you look back on your career and you think about sort of the highlights and maybe those low moments in Canadian tech, is there a time period where you feel like, okay, at least we've come a long way since that point?
That's a great question. I will definitely say there have been, and it depends upon if you're talking about like startups and innovation or like corporate leaders. I personally worked for Canada's former largest tech company, BlackBerry, then called Research in Motion, which doesn't like fundamentally exist in the way it did before, right? A lot has changed from that moment of having one company represent an entire industry for a country. I will say in the past, let's say 10 years, there are so many more companies growing and scaling. We are overwhelmed with opportunities to tell stories. And it seems like particularly now, it used to be a really cool thing that two people in a coffee shop could get their laptops together and start a company, maybe. Now one person can do that by themselves with the available technology. So we're just seeing that like 0 to 1 moment happen so much faster. But yeah, in terms of change or growth, I just think Canada is better at entrepreneurship now. We have a better culture of entrepreneurship. When I was working at tech companies in the early aughts, we didn't even call them startups. They were just small businesses. Like the idea of rapidly scaling wasn't really there. And that's really changed. Young people know that they want to be entrepreneurs and what entrepreneurship can look like now.
It's kind of also, I think, a sign of the times in a positive way that both you and I almost daily are hearing about companies that just haven't been on our radar, because I can say 20 years ago that never happened. I kind of knew all of the startups,
totally.
right? But I mean, it is realistic that now there are companies that, you probably still haven't heard of, and there are hundreds of those
across the country.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's really, really cool. And for like our work, our mission is to like try to find them all, but also create a space where every local Canadian innovation story is surfaced up to the national level so that people in Toronto know what's going on in Montreal or Vancouver or Calgary, which I think was a big thing. 10 years ago, you and I could probably list by name every person in the tech space in Toronto, what they were working on. Now it's just not about Toronto. Figuring out what's happening in Vancouver, what's hot, what's popping is really, really important. Understanding that all of our major cities have something going on is a real development. And I think it's a positive one.
I think so too. I think it would be amazing if there were 100 Betakits that could have their tentacles in all of the different provinces and territories, because like you said, there are these pockets of incredible stories that are happening in my home province of Prince Edward Island. The biotech scene is quite hot there. Those stories also need to be told. So we see that, I think, more and more across the country. Just looking forward, if you think about the future of Betakit, where are you guys heading?
All across the country. By the end of the year, we're going to have writers in 5 provinces across the country. Goal would be to have a person on the ground everywhere it matters. We're also thinking about like what AI is doing to everything, how that changes our relationship with our audience, or how we continue to pursue this mission, taking advantage of like what's available to us. Again, you and I have gone through eras where it's like, oh man, if you could get to number 1 on Dig, that's a really good day for you. I still remember the day the publication I work for got /dotted. That was a really cool day. There are just new versions of that now, and you have to constantly be assessing how you engage with our audience, how they want to engage with you, and like what they want to be served in terms of information, storytelling, insights, and all that stuff. But that never changes, and it's very, very exciting to keep experimenting and trying.
Well, I want to say that I feel very confident and comfortable knowing that we have your voice and your team's voice in terms of the future of tech in Canada. You have a lot of experience, and I think that's important. AI is not going to be able to replace that anytime soon.
I hope not. There's a lot of recorded audio and video of me online, and I hope I am not replaced by like a Max Headroom version of me, so I can keep having conversations like this, keep having you on our podcasts. But yeah, thank you, Amber.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Douglas and Amber. Betakit is a community partner at an upcoming event in Toronto on October 21st called Rally, which is all about giving high school students an opportunity to learn more about better digital health and well-being. Coming up after the break, Amber will share more about Rally, and will also tell you how you can be part of our show.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Thank you for joining us on today's show. If you're interested in sharing your perspective on a topic we discussed today, just leave us a voicemail at ambermactalkback.com.
We so love getting your feedback, so please keep those voicemails coming. Also, if you're in the Toronto area and you have a high school student who wants to go to Rally on October 21st to learn more about better digital health and wellness, please visit timetorally.ca. I'm going to be speaking there about chatbot safety, something we've covered a lot on this show. And my son is going to be speaking as well, so that should be fun for him. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and we'll see you soon. Hey, it's Amber Mac, and I just wanted to remind you that every Tuesday I send out a weekly newsletter that is entirely free. You can sign up over at ambermac.com/newsletter. Each week I talk about the latest in technology, social media, consumer tech, and the list goes on and on. I also like to start each newsletter with a short essay. This is an example of the essay from this past issue. It's been said by many that the most successful people in the world know how to prioritize signal versus noise. This is not a new idea, but a popular mental model that helps all of us separate priorities from distractions. I subscribe to this way of working, especially in today's nonstop information landscape. And since this past week we saw Apple's biggest day of the year, its annual iPhone launch event, it's worth noting that the late Steve Jobs also followed this framework. As one of Jobs' colleagues recently shared in a video that has now gone viral, Jobs would focus on 3 to 5 things every day that he absolutely had to get done. Most other things were distractions dressed up as opportunities. Now, not all of us have the luxury of being able to focus on just 3 to 5 big things a day, but if you really think about what has to get done when you wake up every morning, it certainly simplifies life if you can write down these absolutes and give yourself some grace to let the other stuff wait if needed. Over the years, I've done this in spades. I often joke that it's like my own personal tunnel vision. As someone who grew up in a family that loved harness racing, I've always thought of this focus like the horses with their blinders on, focused only on the track ahead. I can also say with certainty that living in the social media age really amplifies all of this noise out there. I fall into this trap at times, finding myself watching videos of AI-generated babies speaking like adults, which are actually pretty funny, or scrolling endlessly into the dark corners of online comment sections. For now, I can quickly withdraw from those spaces, but I know it's not easy for everyone, especially as dopamine-inducing algorithms tap into our brains to keep us hooked. I could go on and on about this topic, but I want to be part of the signal in your life, not the noise. So this is just a brief reminder that in the chaos of today's information world, sometimes a piece of paper, a pen, and a list of priorities really are the best medicine. So, like I said, that is just a quick sample of the type of essay I like to do at the beginning of each newsletter. We have about 10,000 people in our community so far, and it is such a wonderful process to write this newsletter as well as hear from all of you. So once again, if you haven't had a chance to subscribe, I want you to head on over to ambermac.com/newsletter. Again, it's entirely free and it will land in your inbox every single Tuesday. Thank you again for listening to The Amber Mac Show, and thank you for signing up for my newsletter. Have a great day.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.